Could a match with the Boston Red Sox be the Cardinals' best and final chance to get a Nolan Arenado trade through this offseason? What's going on, everyone, and welcome into this edition of b-schaeff Daily. Brenden Schaeffer with you. It is Tuesday, January 7th, 2025, as the Cardinals still haven't done anything this offseason. It has been a relatively, maybe not even a relatively, it's been a quiet winter on the St. Louis Cardinals front. I believe they're one of a handful of teams in the league not to have spent any money in free agency so far this winter, and I'm not sure any money is coming soon, particularly because the roadblock that would have, in a perfect world, as the Cardinals view it, sort of propelled their offseason along down the road has been immovable. They have not yet been able to trade Nolan Arenado, which has been the stated goal publicly of the team's offseason. And because of their inability to get that through at this point, the Cardinals are just kind of stuck, I think is basically how I would sum it up at this point in time. Now, could an Arenado trade still happen? We'll talk about a recent report from a Boston-based outlet that basically outlined that the Red Sox are a preferred destination, if not the preferred destination for Nolan Arenado. But could the Cardinals and Red Sox actually match on a trade? Because we know what the Cardinals' motivation is. It's to get the money off the books. That has been consistently reported. I saw there was a new article out by Katie Wu that delved into that a little bit further, and it still seems to be the sticking point for the Cardinals. They thought they had it done. They thought they had the deal of their dreams with the Houston Astros because the Cardinals were going to eat only a small portion of the remaining salary. It was going to free up their financial flexibility to be able to focus on maybe trying to move Miles Mikolas or Steven Matz, as unrealistic as those targets might be for another team to potentially want to take on any of that salary. Cardinals could maybe get a little bit more relief there. We've talked about how Kyle Gibson has been somebody that the Cardinals probably would like to bring back, but not at the number that they paid him last year. But it just so happens that Kyle Gibson's market seems to be, in a position where the Cardinals could probably get him for less, but they can't really do any of that, at least by their own operational standards, because they're setting the budget, without trading Arenado. So we'll talk about the latest on the Arenado front. How likely is it that he maybe just ends up staying put? Because there hasn't been a lot of noise, right? There just hasn't been a lot to talk about on this front. And as a result of that, on any front, as it pertains to the Cardinals, because I feel like they're trying to do this first before they really feel like they can go out and spend any additional money. And it would be nice if they could spend a little bit of money. You don't have to go crazy in free agency, but spend a little bit to be able to fill out your roster for next year and give your team the best roster that it can have under the budgetary constraints, and give your fan base something to be at least remotely excited about. And right now, it's just a holding pattern. But we'll talk about all that on today's episode of b-schaeff Daily, which is presented by Smith Agri-Service and Craft Revival LLC. Smith Agri-Service is a family-owned independent retailer providing farmers in Missouri, Illinois, and Iowa with competitive pricing on Corteva, b-schaeff, generic brand crop protection products, and Brevant corn and soybean seed. Scan the QR code on the YouTube graphic in front of you or text 202-988-1106, or you can email at smithag@irtc.net for more information. And Craft Revival LLC specializes in passionately restoring log cabins to their former glory by studying traditional woodworking practices of the past and utilizing them in our modern world to create genuine, timeless beauty. Their focus is preserving these cherished values in existing structures, whether it be your log cabin or historic home, and then elevating them to a higher standard. If you value craftsmanship, give Craft Revival LLC a call today at 573-366-6563. They specialize in log cabin repairs, maintenance, porch remodeling, historic millwork, and now offer new timber-framed construction. Keeping craftsmanship alive one project at a time since 2021, Craft Revival LLC. Thank you to those fine partners for presenting today's episode of b-schaeff Daily. And you can find all their information below in the video description if you want to support the partners. Okay, let's get into it. The latest on Nolan Arenado. It feels like the only thing that has been any worthwhile to talk about this offseason as the Cardinals remain in this holding pattern. The Boston Red Sox seemingly are the last chance. If this is going to happen, it's going to happen with Boston, unless somebody else comes out of the woodwork that we're not anticipating. This story from a couple of days ago Chris Cotillo, who's a Red Sox beat writer for MassLive.com, covers the Red Sox for them, has the Fenway Rundown podcast as well. And this was tweeted by Tyler Milliken, who was sharing the report. He's looks like a producer there for sports radio in Boston. According to Chris Cotillo and Sean McAdam, the Red Sox are a preferred destination, if not the preferred destination, for Nolan Arenado. The tweet continues on a little further to add some context to where the Red Sox might be. And then you can start to see where maybe this doesn't line up perfectly with what the Cardinals are looking to do. But the tweet then mentions that there remains a belief in the industry that the Red Sox remain open to trading Tristan Casas potentially for young pitching. That's the part that maybe doesn't line up with exactly where the Cardinals are looking to go. Red Sox looking to acquire young pitching for their corner infielder that they're maybe not over the moon about, has been underperforming. I think he hit for a pretty low batting average last year. Tristan Casas, who's still a younger player, former first-round pick. And they're trying to get young pitching. The Cardinals are trying to get rid of Arenado's salary. Ideally, you get a young piece or two in return on a trade like that, but it's mostly just about getting out from under the money. And I know that is not music to Cardinals fans' ears. If you're a Cardinal fan, honestly, you should root for the Cardinals not being able to find a trade for Arenado from the perspective of maybe it has the result of a better roster in 2025, because Arenado is going to play for the Cardinals if he's on the team. We've talked about how business is business, and if they can't work something out, even though all the cards have been on the table about, the Cardinals looking to move him and him being happy to go somewhere else, it doesn't seem like it's a irreconcilable situation, because if it were, I think he would have accepted the trade to Houston. But he didn't. Arenado had the opportunity to go somewhere. Again, you're trying to thread a needle on this if you're both sides. If you're the Cardinals, you're trying to find a team that'll take on his money. But you're also trying to find it in a location that Arenado is willing to go. If you're Arenado, you want to go somewhere that presents a better opportunity to win than the one that you're in right now with St. Louis. But if that doesn't happen, then you can maybe consider some teams that are maybe a similar situation, like the Los Angeles Angels, where they're not really contending annually right now. As much as we hate to say it, neither are the Cardinals. But you could be in LA, so that's kind of your home camp, and that's maybe where you'd like to be on the West Coast. So even though that's not an exact target to play for a team that is not necessarily contending, at least in that world, Arenado would be home, would be on the West Coast, and there would be some benefit to him for that. But otherwise, it doesn't seem as though Arenado is desperate to go just anywhere. He maybe wants to just stick it out with the Cardinals if a better option doesn't arrive. That's been the way that this operation has run so far. If that's not really the case, and privately Arenado would really prefer to be somewhere else, and all he did with the Houston situation was make a bad bet that somebody else would come out of the woodwork and try to pick up his contract, and he was wrong. He guessed wrong on that, and maybe regrets not taking up the Houston situation. I don't know. But the way that it has been portrayed is that Arenado is not desperate to get away from the Cardinals, not to the extent that he was willing to accept that Houston deal. That continues to be the thing about this that's so fascinating to me. In a recent article by Katie Wu for The Athletic, she writes that the Astros appeared ready to deal in December. What Mozeliak did not plan for was Arenado exercising his full no-trade clause to block the trade. And now we're a few weeks down the road, and since the Cardinals' ill-fated attempts to trade Arenado to Houston, there's been next to no traction in his trade talks. And that honestly tracks with what has been relayed publicly, because there's just not been any chatter about it up until the Boston side talking about, it's not the Red Sox per se, but Chris Cotillo is a good beat writer that covers the Red Sox and says, yep, it is the case that Arenado would waive the no trade to go to Boston, and that might be where he would like to go. The Red Sox are talking about moving Tristan Casas, which could potentially open up a spot for Arenado. But would the Red Sox be willing to take on the money? I think is going to be the primary question here. And if they don't trade Casas and they're looking to just kind of go forth with the roster they have, then, again, we've used the musical chairs analogy, and perhaps the Cardinals and Arenado in this case, they don't have anywhere to sit. There's no chairs remaining on the floor when the music stops, and there's just nowhere for him to go other than reporting to Jupiter, Florida next month. Like, that could happen here. It was a recent radio interview with Tom Ackerman on Sports on a Sunday Morning for KMOX that John Mozeliak kind of reiterated that it's been quiet and there hasn't been a lot of traction, a lot of momentum on an Arenado trade, and it's probably for all the reasons that we've outlined when it comes to the motivations of the Cardinals trying to thread that needle to match up with the motivations of Arenado. And we just wonder if Arenado, if he's going to be happy to stick with the Cardinals, or if at least content. Doesn't have to be happy, but is he content with it, with the outcome, or is there going to be some sour feelings about the fact that the team wasn't able to get him somewhere that he could maybe contend? They did try. Houston was maybe the best that is ultimately going to emerge, but at the time, if Arenado didn't think so, or he was willing to kind of hedge against that and say, yeah, I think there's going to be something else out there, and if there's not, I'm okay with that outcome. Did he think it all through? I'm sure he's going to be, aware and on top of things. His agent, Joel Wolf, is not probably going to steer him wrong, right? But it is interesting that you can think back to the very end of the season, John Mozeliak saying it's something they wanted to have done before Christmas, and here we are on the 7th of January, and it hasn't gone to plan. So I think it's okay to say that it hasn't gone to their plan, but again, I think it could just be as simple as, dude, we found you the trade. Houston's a good club. They're contending consistently, and they were willing to match up with us, and you held out for something else. Maybe it pays off for Arenado, maybe it doesn't. But let's hear from that interview with Tom Ackerman from KMOX. Again, the show was Sports on a Sunday Morning, and Tom Ackerman asked the elephant in the room question of Mo during this interview of what's the latest with Arenado and his trade market, and here was Mo's response.
Not really. I guess the update would be it's been very quiet. Obviously, if we have the ability to find him a place that he desires, that's something we're going to try to do. But, if not, then he'll have to be a part of our club moving forward. And I think he understands that. I think, again, we have a lot of time left. We'll see how things shake out over the next 3 to 6 weeks. But a lot of time, and just have to remind ourselves that there is that time.
That's interesting. That's Mo's response. And again, you can check out that full interview from KMOX Sports on a Sunday Morning with Tom Ackerman. We'll link that in the description to this video below. It's very interesting because Mozeliak's response kind of dripping a little bit there with, well, I think he understands that he'll be on the team if we don't find somewhere to trade him, which is kind of like, we did find somewhere to trade him if it was such a value to him to be elsewhere. And I don't think there's animosity there because, again, this is a business and it's understood by all parties. The Cardinals are being forced based on the results on the field and other external factors like the revenues to pivot in this upcoming season. They're going to lower the payroll. They've told us since October that this was going to be the plan. And so it doesn't come as a surprise talking about it now. But I think the more we realize how dead set on trying to move Arenado's deal they are, and not to move him for young players. That's probably what they would get in return, but mostly to get some salary off the books, to get that salary and that payroll relief is the primary motivator. And to understand the extent to which that is the case really kind of paints the picture of the direction the Cardinals are looking to go. Like, again, Kyle Gibson, if that's somebody the Cardinals end up looking to bring back as sort of a veteran presence for the pitching staff, well, he was making like 10, 11 million last year. It's not a huge number, but if a decrease off of that, right? If Gibby would be worth, I don't know, think about Michael Lorenzen just signed for $7 million with the Royals. If Gibby's worth $7, $8 million on the market, and that's not a massive number, but it's a number the Cardinals are not comfortable spending right now until they get some other salary relief from other places. And it makes sense too, because you've got the Matz money and you've got the Michaelis money. I don't think you move Michaelis, but like if they can find a way to move Matz, how much of it can be off the Cardinals' books? Is there a team that says we'll pay half of Matz's salary? I think it's another like 10, 11 million. We'll pay 5 and you guys pay 6. Is that worth it to the Cardinals to send him away, or would they rather have Steven Matz as an option when, you just kind of throw arms at the problem, and the problem can sometimes go away if you get fortunate. The problem being, who starts games for this team? We've got some young guys that we like. We got some veterans. The more arms, the better. And Steven Matz is a solid arm. It's just one that has not stayed healthy during his time with the Cardinals. But like that would be the motivation to trading him if they're going, okay, if we can get a team to take $5 million of Matz's money, right? So we save that money as the St. Louis Cardinals and we pay Kyle Gibson $7. That's, we find Gibby to be more reliable because of all the number of starts that Matz has missed over the years. And so like that could be an angle I would not be surprised to see the Cardinals pursue, but like is even that enough? Because if you got to pay Gibby more than the salary saved by moving Matz, which again remains to be seen if they can do, or if it makes sense to do, because they can have a goal. They can have a goal to trade Steven Matz, and you say, let's try and get this done. But if you're not getting anything out of it, if you're not getting the team to eat some money that you're sending Matz to, why wouldn't you just keep him? You already owe him the money, so what are you actually gaining? I think that's exactly what the Cardinals are right now with the Arenado thing. It's like, we're not going to move him just to move him. We're going to have to get something out of it, and the something that they're looking for more so than young talent in return is salary relief. And it's just interesting that Mozeliak's response is to mention, like, I think Arenado understands that he'll be part of our club if we can't find somewhere for him to go. But to me, that points a little bit toward, we did our due diligence. We thought we had a deal in place. The extent to which, that was really a surprise to the Cardinals at the end that he said no, or the circumstances under it, because again, it was then reported that he wasn't just closing the door forever on the Astros, but he wasn't ready to accept a trade there right now. That was kind of a dreamland, fantasyland scenario that the Astros would continue to wait around for that decision when they were looking to fill their corner infield. They're losing Alex Bregman. They said, okay, Arenado would come cheaper. Maybe we can pivot to that. The Arenado thing didn't work out. We tried it, but we're not going to sit around and just kind of have our hands tied by another team's situation that they're trying to work through. We're going to go get Christian Walker. We'll move Isaac Paredes to third base. And as a result of that, you're able to kind of maneuver your pieces. And as the Astros close the door on some of the glaring needs of their roster, the Cardinals just were, not able to make it happen with Houston as a result of Arenado saying, I don't know, maybe something better can come along. That's still the way that it kind of feels to me. Let me know out there in Cardinals land if you have another thought on Arenado declining that Astros trade, because again, the reports came out. It's not forever. I'm not saying I would never play for them, but it kind of struck me as, can I see what else might be out there? Can the Cardinals see what else might be out there? And that's got to be frustrating for the Cardinals. And you hear, again, I don't think animosity, but maybe with Mo there, a little bit of, if we can't find anywhere to move him, then he understands that he'll be on our team next year. But Mo also adds, we've got a lot of time left. We'll see how things shake out over the coming weeks. So we'll see if there's anything that can end up happening for the Cardinals on this front. But it seems as though, based on the reports that are out there now, that Boston would be a place that Arenado would go. So that gets out there into the ether. The Cardinals, again, I think if you look back at the reports from the time, I don't recall that Houston was specifically on the list of places that Arenado would be willing to go. But it was one that clearly the Cardinals were of the belief that if they got things down to the nitty-gritty, that there was a strong chance that they would have the trade done. Otherwise, I don't know why they would have put in all the legwork there to facilitate that trade with the Astros if they weren't pretty sure that Arenado was going to accept it. So I think it stands to reason that took them by surprise a little bit, as was mentioned there in the latest article from Katie Wu for The Athletic. But now that the Boston thing is out in the ether, is that sort of a way that can be the bat signal to the Cardinals of like, hey, if you want to go down this road, Arenado is not going to make you waste your time on this one if this is one that you can pursue. Whether or not there's any substantive talks going on between the Cardinals and Red Sox, time will tell on that. But as you heard from Mozeliak in that KMOX interview, it has not been a market that has been moving swiftly. So that's where things are. And the report from MassLive.com added that there would be no hesitation on Arenado's end to accept the deal. That strikes me as like, it needs to be abundantly clear, because the Cardinals went and wasted a bunch of time on a Houston trade that would never had a chance of happening. And maybe that's why this gets pushed out. I'm not sure how without contact with somebody in Arenado's camp that the Boston side would be able to have some confidence in understanding that would be a team that he would be willing to go to. So that seems real. That seems plausible. And it's just a matter of what's their appetite for taking on the money, because that's really the only thing the Cardinals are looking to do. It probably started at some point like a pipe dream of, hey, we can trade him, we can get a team to take his money, and we'll probably get some good prospects back. And now it's like, well, if we can just get a team to take his money, or most of his money, that'll accomplish the goals that we have as the St. Louis Cardinals. I think that's how they view it at this point. And is Boston that place? Right. And look, you might not be able to be picky. You might have to eat more of it than you were going to eat with the Houston deal. The Houston deal is not on the table. It was taken off the table by Arenado himself, and then by the Astros when they decided that, no, we appreciate the dialogue. We're going to move on to a deal that we have some control over. We can tell the player, hey, we'll pay you this much, and the player signs, and then he's on their team. That was not the case with Arenado. Did he overplay his hand? Is the fact that he did what he did an indication that he's actually not too desperate to get away from the Cardinals in the first place? That could certainly be the case. We're going to see how this all plays out. I wouldn't anticipate seeing Arenado at winter warm-up either way, because all of this is going to be hanging in the ether, so I'm sure you won't see him there. But that's, just the nature of the beast with this business. But we'll see. The rub of it really is that it does seem to be a major financial constraint on the Cardinals and their plans for the rest of the offseason. The way that it is being described is that it is significantly stalling the way that the Cardinals are looking to approach their offseason. They thought they would be able to get this one done first and could go from there, but it hasn't happened. It hasn't happened, and it's pretty soon going to be February before you know it. One other little quip from Katie Woo's article with The Athletic, where, of course, Joel Wolfe, his agent, spoke at the winter meetings, had mentioned, and this is a quote that Katie threw into her article, that he's in a good place with the Cardinals. He's not going to go just to go. And that was said before the veto of the Houston trade. So it's interesting that there was kind of, from his agent anyway, the greasing of the wheels that, hey, it's not just going to be anywhere. And again, it's fair to wonder, how did the Cardinals get that far down the road with Houston without there being some knowledge of the degree to which the appetite was going to be there from Arenado to accept the trade? Who's to say? Maybe it's one of those things where, hey, if it's any lead, pursue it, because there hasn't been a ton of action on it this offseason, so you might as well go through the motions and the steps and see if you get there. You can have the player who, in theory, can block, and not even in theory, in practice too, can block any trade with his no trade clause. He doesn't have to accept any trade. It could be a team that he had on the list of, yeah, I'll accept it, but then when push comes to shove, he could say no, right? That's within his right. It would be kind of a rough move to do to the team who went through the trouble of trying to get the deal facilitated. But maybe Astros were not on that original list from Arenado. Remember, it was reported it's going to just be a couple places that he would go. And then Joel Wolfe, at that little powwow he had at the winter meetings in Dallas, said, no, the list is bigger than you might think of teams that he would be willing to go play for. But kind of the timeline of how that list was constructed and then actually tangibly having an offer on the table. There's a difference between theoretical and a tangible offer in front of Arenado, hey, this trade's ready. It just needs your approval. The Cardinals maybe just had to do that to be able to get an understanding of exactly where Arenado was. And if the teams that were on his list weren't willing to play ball to the degree that Houston was, then, maybe that's why that came to fruition the way that it did, that the Cardinals got so far down the road without really knowing if Arenado would accept the trade. Sometimes you got to put that in front of somebody. Make a guy say no, because it puts him in the position mentally of having to legitimately decide his future, rather than, oh yeah, I might be willing to go play there, or yeah, I would say yes to that. You're ready to make that decision. It changes, I think, from a human psyche perspective, what actually you're weighing. And so Arenado decided to say no to that one. And like I said, maybe that's an indication that he overplayed his hand because he would prefer not to come back to the Cardinals since they're not going to be as competitive on paper and in the payroll department. Or maybe it's a sign that Arenado is understanding and comfortable with that. And if he can upgrade his situation, he'll do it this offseason. But if not, he's coming back to Jupiter and he's been working hard and is going to be ready to help the Cardinals win. I think the kind of corollary to all this, though, is that the Cardinals would like to be able to have an everyday spot for Nolan Gorman. They'd like to have an everyday spot for Brenden Donovan. They'd like to play, I think they'd probably like to play Thomas Saggese a good amount. But if they're not able to do that because Arenado's on the team, then that'll be what it is. But, does that get in the way a little bit of the stated goal of 2025 for the Cardinals, which is, hey, let's get a look at some younger guys. Maybe those younger guys surprise you and they end up being pretty darn good and they take that next step forward and suddenly, bam, there's your young core and it didn't cost you any more. It didn't cost you what last year's payroll did, but you might not be any worse off in the standings. That's a real possibility, but it's one that's more difficult to pursue if Arenado's here. Now, that's not me saying the Cardinals will be worse if Arenado's here. They'll just have less opportunity for the people in the Nolan Gorman bucket on a daily basis. Now, specific to Gorman, that might not be that big of a deal. They can play him every day as a DH if they have to. Not every day, because you'll have Wilson Contreras mixed in. But like, I think more in the Sajacy conversation is, are they going to have enough playing time to keep him on the big league roster out of Jupiter, or are they going to have to send him to AAA until there's an obvious place to play him every day? You've got Brendan Donovan, but if he's playing infield instead of outfield, then, what does that look like for some of the guys down the line? How does that impact an Alec Burleson, who is another guy in that bucket of, younger players? Not to say he's completely unproven. We've seen him at the big league level, and certainly somebody that you want in your lineup, especially against right-handed pitching. But where do they find the time when you've got a number of guys that kind of cross streams into, okay, I'm a DH, but I also can play corner outfield. I can also play first base. This guy that can play some first base can also play some third base, and this guy can play about anywhere. But if you've got other bats that you're prioritizing, like, there's kind of a lot of that going on, at least on paper, for where the Cardinals are looking to be. And of course, a lot of this gets resolved with injuries, but I think part of the Arenado motivation, the main thing is the money. The secondary benefit, if you could call it, to a team that's trying to evaluate itself this year is, what do we have in these young guys? Well, we can find out if Arenado's spot can be accounted for with somebody else. But if Arenado's here, you're going to play him, because I think he gives you still your best chance to win and succeed. But that's just not the way that the Cardinals have been, I think, envisioning their offseason and envisioning their 2025. They've been able to think about what it would be like without Arenado, and it's not that I think it'll make them better to do it, but I think it'll get them more information about the younger players that they're trying to find out about if he's on a different team. And I think, again, from the ownership level down, they wanted to save some money. And if they can't do that via Arenado, do they then make other trades that they don't really want to make from a baseball standpoint just to make the money work? And suddenly, I think the group that loses there is the fans, if that ends up being the case. Because I think you have an easier way to replace Arenado's production at third with a Gorman or a Donovan or a combination than you do, say, like, we're trading Helsley now because, that's $8-9 million that we're trying to get off the books, and we'll get a good prospect for him. But that's a decision that the Cardinals made because they couldn't trade Arenado. They're primarily trying to get rid of money. Or maybe like an Eric Fetty. They say, well, the market was interested in him and we didn't want to move him, but he makes $7.5 million, so we figured that would be the next best thing. Or if it's just eating Steven Matz's contract or half of it to make him go away, rather than throw him out there, because he has had seasons in St. Louis even with a 3.5 ERA. Kind of came about it that year in a bit of a weird way. Had some relief stints mixed in there to get to the number, and had it's a rough start, I think, got injured and then came on strong late. But like, Matz has had okay numbers. He's just not been particularly reliable, and the Cardinals, I think, would rather, if they had their druthers, pay, part of a contract, allow another team to take on the rest of the money, and be able to bring in a guy like Gibson that they had last year, who, look, again, they still on the field want to be competitive, and Gibson was reliable. He'll take the ball. He'll pitch through things because he's a veteran who's done it before. And so I think that's honestly a motivation here too. So not a lot has changed necessarily in our conversation, but still some interesting tidbits, hopefully, that you found from today's episode. Appreciate you guys for listening and for sticking with the channel. Make sure you are subscribed or you follow on Spotify to B-Schaeff Daily, wherever you get your podcasts. You can find us, and stay tuned, because hopefully the market will end up heating up. And even if it doesn't, by the time winter warm-up rolls around in a couple of weeks, that's when we'll have podcast topics to talk about on a more regular basis, because we can just, for the next 2 weeks after winter warm-up, can talk about any player on a given day and say, hey, here's what he had to say at warm-up, here's what we think about him for the coming season, and we'll kind of go from there and be up and at him on a more regular basis. I'm trying to get to you guys as often as I can now, but it's been hard to find the motivation without much going on. So if you got podcast topics for me, by all means, throw them into the comments here on YouTube, and we legitimately might take you up on that. But for now, that'll do it for this edition of B-Schaeff Daily. Thank you guys so much for the support and for listening, and we will talk to you next time on B-Schaeff Daily. Peace.